I'm Jean Roars. I'm part of our Global Missions Committee and just have some exciting news for you with regard to something the Global Missions Committee has been thinking about, praying about, and wanting to support. If you don't know, our committee's purpose is to pursue God's calling of disciple making around the world by fostering missionary relationships that are in theological, practical, and relational harmony with Soma Church. And as we've been meeting and discussing how we can engage with the Great Commission as a body, one of the things on our hearts has been the conflict in Ukraine, and seeing that in the news all the time and wondering, seeing people being displaced and wondering what we can do as a church, as the body of Christ, to come alongside those who are being so deeply impacted by what's happening in Ukraine. And one of the first organizations that came to mind to me is an organization run by a friend of ours, and it's called Tomorrow Clubs. And we have, I'll let my husband Matthew introduce their executive director, but he's a personal friend. Matthew.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend Paul Marty. And in 1997, Paul and his wife Cindy moved their 3 kids from Minnesota to Zaporozhye, Ukraine. And like most chiropractors that you know, he used that skill set to launch a micro lending program with Hope International. So an incredible step of faith, an incredible journey. Simultaneous to that, when they got into Ukraine, they saw an amazing need to work with youth in discipleship and in caring for them. And that's how Tomorrow Clubs was born. And so Paul, could you please tell us about Tomorrow Clubs, about the ministry, and what God has done in the years since?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today and just tell you a little bit about how God has led us into working with kids and teens in Ukraine. It's, as Matthew said, it's been 25 years ago that we started the ministry, and what Tomorrow Clubs does is work with kids and teens, mostly in underserved communities. We started the program in Ukraine. That's still our largest country. But since that, God has led us into several other Eastern European countries, and just recently into a couple of countries in Africa. So we've been able to we've been able to increase the outreach tremendously because of that. So yeah, so we work with a network of children's Bible clubs that meet weekly. The focus is long-term discipleship, introducing kids to Jesus and then helping them learn to become like Jesus.
And I love that, and I love, because that's something we have a fairly young body at Soma, but there are kids popping out everywhere of the woodwork because of so many babies being born and things. And so that's something really on our hearts too. You guys felt the need to reach out to kids because of a disparity you were seeing in the church at the time, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. What we saw was when we first arrived in Ukraine, it was what we saw was just a barrier in most of the communities, and God's really led us to work in small communities. And the situation in the churches there is, I think is unique because because of the decades of communism, people there have learned to have kind of treated Christians as basically social lepers. So we've been able to, through the Tomorrow Clubs, since that's kind of a neutral environment, we've been able to kind of break down that barrier in those communities between the church and the community, so that parents are actually willing to let their kids come to church. So yeah, so in the situation we saw when we arrived too was in most of those communities, churches were just filled with older people. We saw very few kids or young families in the churches. So, that was, I think, what caught our eye first, is that, okay, what's going to happen to these churches when these old people die? The church is going to be gone too.
Yeah. And then, I mean, and as I have thought about Tomorrow Clubs and thought about what's happening in Ukraine right now, because you guys are currently in almost every country that borders Ukraine, as
Yes.
well as this is your 25th year, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. And so, as I've looked at that, one of the things that's been central in my growing up is my parents were in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan, pre-Soviet invasion. And so it was back in the 70s when there was peace in Afghanistan. And so it was before the Russians came in and before the Taliban. And I've just watched my parents' hearts break over, you know, decades of watching what has happened to that country. And so, you know, having lived in Ukraine, having such so many relationships there, and knowing what it's like on the ground, I'm sure that's similar for you. And so as we see the news, I know it impacts you much closer to home, but help us understand a little bit about what Tomorrow Clubs as an organization is doing in response, and how you guys are serving in Ukraine during this unique time.
Yeah, well, you know, when the war started, we've never been in relief work at all. I mean, you know, we've always been a disciple making organization, but we realized that, you know, God had placed us really in a unique position to help there, because we had a network of hundreds of local churches that we'd had a long, long-term relationship with in basically every corner of the country of Ukraine. I mean, you know, literally hundreds of local churches that we have, you know, intimate relationships with. So it was, you know, we were in a unique position to help. And, you know, I think our team, to their credit, just immediately kind of shifted into what can we do to help. And they started providing, you know, emergency lodging and food and transportation for people that needed to evacuate. Just really doing whatever they could to help. And, you know, I think, you know, it was one of those things where we just saw, you know, God has us here for such a time as this.
Yeah. And as a missions committee, we're committing $5,000 to help support the work of Tomorrow Clubs, and especially, you know, with all that's happening in their sphere of influence. But if you've been looking for a way, Soma, to practically help as you've watched the news and what's going on in Ukraine, this is an organization we'd really encourage you to support. And so we'll put a link with this communication, but we would love to see the Soma body match or exceed what the missions committee is giving. And so we're just thankful for your time and the ways that Soma has been, you know, giving. And we'd love to bless you, Paul, and all the work that you guys are doing. So thanks.
Well, yeah, well, let me take this opportunity just to say a huge thank you. You know, so many people have got behind this effort. And I mean, we've just been amazed at the outpouring of resources that have come our way, and you know, many churches just like yours. So we are so grateful that, you know, God's linked us all together to help, and, you know, to provide to provide help like immediately, you know, where it's needed. And you know, we give you our guarantee that this is going to be put to good use. So thank you so much for your generosity.